My name is Riley, 27 years old, and I work as an independent antique appraiser. I handed my husband my positive pregnancy test, expecting tears of joy. Instead, he threw my suitcase onto the wet asphalt and screamed that he had a secret vasectomy 2 years ago. I spent the night shivering in my beat-up car. Then my phone rang. The lawyer of my late husband had news. The software my first husband built before he died just sold for $86 million. But there was one catch: the money was locked in a trust for an unborn child. The exact child my current husband just threw me out over. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build an empire from the ashes of betrayal. Then a crumpled piece of glossy paper fluttered through the downpour and hit me squarely in the chest. It was my ultrasound photo, the one I had eagerly brought home from the clinic just an hour earlier. Brandon stood in the doorway, with his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me while the rain soaked through my thin jacket. I had a vasectomy 2 years ago. He screamed, his voice cutting through the thunder. Who is the father? I stood frozen on the driveway, staring at the man I had married, the man who had promised to love me and help me rebuild my life after the devastating loss of my first husband, Thomas, in 2022. I opened my mouth to speak to tell him that was impossible because I had never even looked at another man since the day we took our vows. But before the words could leave my throat, another figure stepped out onto the porch. It was Cynthia, my mother-in-law. She crossed her arms tightly over her expensive cashmere cardigan, looking down at me with the exact same expression of disgust she had worn since the day Brandon first introduced us. "I told you, Brandon," she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "She is just a broke widow who brought nothing but her dead first husband's debts into this family. I warned you about her working-class background. I told you she was a gold digger, and now look at her. She is trying to trap you with another man's bastard just to secure her place in this house." The sheer cruelty of her words paralyzed me. She constantly reminded me that I was damaged goods, a woman who came with too much baggage for her perfect son, who worked as a mid-level manager at a prestigious investment fund. Brandon did not even look at me again. He simply turned his back, grabbed the heavy oak door and slammed it shut. The deadbolt clicked into place, echoing with a finality that shook me to my core. There was no hesitation, no demand for an explanation, no moment of doubt or willingness to hear my side, just a cold, immediate eviction into the freezing storm. You do not beg people to love you, and you certainly do not beg them to believe you when you know your own truth. I bent down and peeled the wet ultrasound photo from the pavement. I wiped the mud from the image of my tiny, growing baby and carefully tucked it into my coat pocket. Then I grabbed the handle of my soaked suitcase and dragged it toward the street where my beat-up 2012 Honda Civic was parked. The engine sputtered in protest before finally roaring to life. I drove aimlessly for an hour, navigating the flooded streets of the city, while trying to process the absolute collapse of my reality. I had no access to the joint accounts, and my own modest earnings from my recent antique appraisals were currently tied up in pending invoices. With nowhere else to go, I finally pulled into the glaring fluorescent glow of a 24-hour Walmart parking lot. I parked under a flickering street lamp, locked the doors and reclined my driver's seat, as far back as it would go. I wrapped myself in a damp blanket I kept in the trunk for emergencies. I placed my hand over my stomach, making a silent vow to the child growing inside me. I would not let this break us. I had survived the grief of losing Thomas, and I would survive the betrayal of Brandon. I finally drifted into a fitful, exhausted sleep right around dawn. At 6 in the morning, a sharp, aggressive knock on my car window jolted me awake. My heart hammered against my ribs as I shot up in my seat, fully expecting a security guard or a police officer telling me to move along. Instead, peering through the rain-streaked glass, I saw a familiar face. It was Keisha, my sister-in-law, who was married to Brandon's older brother. She was standing in the freezing drizzle, wearing her blue pediatric doctor scrubs, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee and a thick manila envelope tucked tightly under her arm. She tapped the glass again, gesturing frantically for me to unlock the door. I rolled the window down, shivering as the cold morning air rushed into the stale cabin. "Do not believe a single word that lying bastard said to you last night," she said, her voice sharp and urgent. She shoved one of the hot coffee cups into my freezing hands and then tossed the heavy manila envelope straight onto my lap. "I brought you his real medical files straight from the clinic database. Brandon never had a vasectomy. He faked the entire thing. He is currently having an affair with the daughter of his investment fund, chief executive officer. Open that envelope right now." I stared at the thick envelope resting on my lap. I broke the envelope seal with trembling fingers. Keisha leaned against my Honda Civic sipping her coffee. Her eyes were exhausted from a pediatric shift, but her expression was pure steel. I pulled out a stack of hospital logs. "Look at the highlighted date," Keisha instructed, pointing her finger. "That is when Brandon claimed he had the procedure. Now look at the status code." The status code read, "Cancelled by patient." "He never went through with it," Keisha stated flatly, her voice cutting through the steady rain. "He chickened out, but he needed you to think he was sterile." "Why?" I asked, my throat tight. "Why go through this lie?" Keisha let out a harsh laugh. "Because Brandon is a calculating opportunist. He has been sleeping with Monique Harrington for 6 months. You know Monique, right? The daughter of his investment fund, chief executive officer." The familiar name hit me like a heavy physical blow to the chest. I had met her twice at company holiday parties. She was young, dripping in designer labels, and always stood too close to my husband. "Brandon is up for a massive promotion," Keisha continued. "Mr. Harrington is highly protective of his daughter. If Brandon divorces you amicably, it is just a sad end. But if caught cheating on a pregnant wife, he loses the promotion, the girl, and his career. He needed a reason to make you the villain. He needed a reason to throw you out so violently that no one would question his motives. Claiming you cheated on him is his get-out-of-jail-free card." I stared at the medical logs, my vision blurring. The sheer scale of his deception was breathtaking. He had planned this. He had manipulated my reality to protect his corporate climb. Suddenly my phone buzzed in the cup holder. Then it buzzed again. A frantic vibration signaling disaster. I swiped the screen. The first notification was an alert from our bank. "Account frozen." I tapped into the banking app frantically. My heart plummeted into my stomach. The available balance read $0.00. Brandon had drained the entire account overnight. Keisha peered through the rain-slicked window with genuine concern. "What did he do?" "He took everything," I whispered. I pulled a crumpled $10 bill and 4 singles from my pocket. "I have $14 to my name, Keisha." Another harsh email notification suddenly popped up on my glowing screen. It was marked urgent from the National Antique Appraisers Association. My hands shook as I opened it. "Dear Riley," the email read, "we received a complaint from Brandon Evans regarding alleged theft of artifacts from Cynthia Evans. Your membership is suspended pending a full investigation." I could not breathe. My membership was my lifeline. It was the only way I secured appraisal contracts. Then the final devastating blow arrived. A second email popped up. It was from the auction house I had been working with. They were officially canceling my upcoming appraisal contract, a contract that would have paid me $10,000 next week. "He is destroying my career," I said, my voice rising in panic. "He emailed the national board and accused me of stealing from his mother. He knows I rely on my reputation. Without that contract, I cannot even afford to rent an apartment or hire a lawyer." Keisha's face hardened with fury. "They are trying to starve you out. Cynthia and Brandon want you desperate enough to sign whatever divorce papers they put in front of you. Do not let them break you, Riley. You are so much stronger than those 2 pathetic cowards." I looked down at the $14 in my hand. Strength felt like a luxury I could not afford. I was pregnant, homeless, unemployed, and completely broke. The rain pounded against the windshield, a cold reminder of my brutal reality. I had no family left to fall back on since my parents passed away. Thomas was gone. My entire life had been erased in 8 hours. I need to think, I said, pressing my hands against my temples. I need to figure out how I am going to eat today. Keisha reached into her scrub pocket. Let me give you some cash. I shook my head immediately. No. If Brandon finds out you are helping, he will turn his brother against you. You have enough dealing with that family on your own. I will figure this out. Keisha wanted to argue, but her pager beeped loudly. She glanced at the screen and sighed. I have a severe emergency at the pediatric hospital I have to go. But keep these records safe, Riley. They are your only leverage. Call me tonight. I watched her sprint toward her car, leaving me alone in the parking lot. The silence inside my cold vehicle was deafening. I stared at the dashboard clock. It was 6:30 in the morning. The entire city was waking up and I had absolutely nothing left. I closed my heavy eyes, trying to slow my rapidly racing heartbeat. I needed a plan. I needed a way to fight a man who had the power of a massive investment fund and a ruthless mother. As panic threatened to swallow me, my phone lit up again. The sudden ringtone sliced through the quiet cabin. I looked at the caller identification. It was a New York area code, a number I did not recognize. I hesitated, wondering if it was a reporter or the appraisal board demanding answers. With nothing left to lose, I answered the phone. Hello? I said, my voice raspy and exhausted. Is this Riley Evans? The voice on the other end asked. It was a man with a deep professional tone. Yes, I am speaking. My name is Arthur Gallagher, he said. I am a Manhattan attorney managing the estate trust of Thomas Miller. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Riley. Your life is about to change. I stared at the thick manila envelope resting on my lap. The voice on the phone repeated my name. Yes, this is Riley, I managed to quietly say. Arthur Gallagher did not waste time with pleasantries. I represent the estate of your late husband, Thomas Miller, he said. Come to my downtown office immediately. We have a significant development regarding his intellectual property. My mind raced. Thomas had been a brilliant artificial intelligence developer, but when he passed away, his passion project had been rejected by every major tech firm. Brandon spent our entire marriage mocking Thomas, calling him a delusional failure who left me with nothing but broken dreams and medical debt. Mr. Gallagher, I have exactly $14 to my name, and my husband just locked me out in a freezing storm. I do not have resources to deal with estate issues right now. You completely misunderstand, Riley, Gallagher replied smoothly. Thomas Software was never worthless. He secured the patent just weeks before his passing. Yesterday afternoon, a Silicon Valley conglomerate acquired the exclusive rights to his entire cybersecurity framework. The payout is exactly $86 million. The air vanished from my lungs. The desolate parking lot seemed to tilt. $86 million. The massive number echoed in the freezing cabin. But as I struggled to process the magnitude of his words, Gallagher's tone became noticeably more serious. The funds are not simply sitting in a checking account waiting for a withdrawal, he cautioned. Thomas anticipated your generous nature would make you a vulnerable target. He knew you had a habit of sacrificing your own well-being for others. Therefore, he placed the fortune into an ironclad, irrevocable trust. What exactly does all that mean? I asked. It means the money is protected from external claims creditors or current spouses, Gallagher explained clearly. And it comes with one absolute condition. Thomas wrote that you would only inherit the principal when you prove you have moved forward with your life by starting a new family. The trust only unlocks the day you bear or legally adopt a child. Until then, the $86 million remains completely sealed and untouched. I sat absolutely frozen. My hand instinctively dropped to my lower abdomen. The baby. The tiny, unexpected life quietly growing inside me. The exact same child Brandon had violently rejected just a few hours ago, using it as a convenient prop to fabricate a cheating scandal and protect his corporate promotion with Monique. Brandon had screamed that I was trying to trap him with another man bastard. He had thrown me into the pouring rain to protect his miserable management career, completely unaware that he had just discarded the sole key to an $86 million empire. Does my current husband have any legal right to this money? I asked, my voice ringing with newfound clarity. Gallagher let out a dry chuckle. Thomas was incredibly thorough with his legal instructions. The trust dictates that no future spouse can ever touch a single cent of the principal. The money belongs exclusively to you and your child. Your current husband is legally and permanently locked out. Now, are you currently pregnant or in the process of adopting? Yes, I whispered, staring down at Keisha's stolen medical files detailing Brandon's fake vasectomy. I am pregnant. Then I highly suggest you drive to my office right now, Gallagher said. We have crucial paperwork to finalize. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot. The torrential rain that had felt like a cruel punishment now felt like a cleansing baptism. I walked into Gallagher's sleek mahogany-paneled office, wearing damp clothes and muddy sneakers. But my spine was perfectly straight. The receptionist offered me hot tea and a dry towel, treating me not like a homeless scapegoat, but like a chief executive officer. Gallagher sat across from me at a glass conference table, sliding stacks of legal documents in my direction. As I signed my name over and over, legally binding myself as the sole executor and primary beneficiary of the newly activated trust, the staggering reality of my new existence settled deep into my bones. The power dynamic of my entire life had just flipped in the span of a single morning. I was no longer the broke widow Cynthia loved to publicly humiliate at family dinners. I was no longer the dependent wife Brandon could manipulate and discard to impress his boss daughter. I was a multimillionaire with the full legal backing of one of the most ruthless estate firms in the country. We will establish a secure operational account for your immediate use, Gallagher said, stamping the final seal on the trust documents. You will have access to a substantial line of credit by this afternoon. I strongly suggest you find comfortable luxury living arrangements immediately. Your stress levels need to be expertly managed for the health of the child. I was about to ask him about retaining a vicious divorce attorney when my cell phone vibrated violently against the table. I glanced down at the illuminated screen. The name Cynthia flashed across the display, followed by a text message preview that made my blood run completely cold. I opened the message. It was a calendar invite for a lunch reservation at Le Petit, the most hyper-exclusive, ridiculously expensive Michelin-star restaurant in the city. Beneath the reservation link was a message from my arrogant mother-in-law. Come to Le Petit at 1 o'clock. Brandon will have the divorce papers ready. Sign them quietly and admit fault, and I will write you a check for $2,000. That should cover a quick abortion and a bus ticket out of this state. Do not embarrass us by making a scene. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the vile words over and over until my vision blurred. $2,000. An abortion. A bus ticket out of state. They truly believed I was a desperate, starving animal they could swat away with spare pocket change. They wanted to sadistically humiliate me one last time in front of the city elite, ensuring I knew my place at the absolute bottom of their social hierarchy. I looked up at Gallagher, who was watching my face carefully. Is there a problem, Riley? He asked. No problem at all, Arthur, I replied, locking my phone and slipping it into my pocket. In fact, my soon-to-be ex-husband and his mother have just invited me to an expensive lunch. I think I am going to be very hungry. I walked out of Gallagher's office feeling a strange mix of profound peace and razor-sharp focus. The heavy rain had finally stopped, leaving the New York streets slick and glistening. I hailed a cab directly to Le Petit. The opulent dining room buzzed with the quiet hum of wealth, a stark contrast to the storm I had just endured. The maitre d' practically sneered at my damp trench coat and scuffed sneakers, but when I gave Cynthia name, he reluctantly escorted me to a private alcove in the back of the dining room. Brandon and Cynthia were already seated, bathing in the warm, expensive glow of crystal chandeliers. Beside Brandon sat Monique Harrington, dressed in a sleek Chanel suit that cost more than my entire antique inventory. Brandon barely glanced up from his phone as I approached Cynthia. However, looked me up and down like I was a toxic stain on the pristine white tablecloth. Look who decided to show up, Cynthia said loudly, intentionally, drawing the attention of nearby diners. I told you she would come crawling, Brandon. She smells like wet dog and desperation. Brandon finally pocketed his phone and gestured lazily to the empty chair Riley. This is Monique from the office. We were just discussing a new portfolio, but I suppose we can pause for this. Monique offered a tight, patronizing smile. It is so nice to finally meet you. Riley Brandon has told me so much about your little antique hobby. A few hours ago, I would have cowered under their combined cruelty. Now armed with the undeniable power of Thomas' legacy, their arrogance simply amused me. I sat down without taking off my coat. 2 silver ice buckets held empty bottles of vintage champagne, and half-eaten plates of caviar and Wagyu beef cluttered the table. They had clearly been celebrating long before I arrived. Brandon did not offer me water. Instead, he reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents. He slid them across the table. They bumped against my empty water glass. "Sign them," Brandon demanded, dropping a heavy gold pen on top of the stack. "I am keeping the house, the cars, and my entire investment portfolio. You will assume the $50,000 in credit card debt we accumulated last year. Since you were not contributing a real salary to the household anyway, it is only fair that you take the liabilities." I stared at the papers. He had used those joint credit cards to buy luxury watches and fund lavish golf trips. Now he wanted to strap me with his reckless debt while throwing me onto the street. Cynthia reached into her designer purse and pulled out a personal check. She flicked her wrist, sending the crisp paper fluttering onto my lap. "There is $2,000, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "That covers a quick clinic visit to take care of your little problem, plus a bus ticket back to whatever working-class neighborhood you came from. Make sure you clean out your belongings from the house by tonight. We have a professional cleaning crew coming tomorrow to erase your presence. We cannot have Monique breathing in your dust. Do not contact my son again. Do not ask for another dime." Before I could respond, a waiter in a crisp white shirt approached the table carrying a silver tray. He placed the leather billfold discreetly near Brandon. Brandon did not even look at the total. He simply pushed the tray across the table until it rested directly in front of me. "Since you pride yourself on being such an independent modern woman," Brandon sneered, "you can cover lunch. Consider it your parting gift to us. The total is $1,500. Use whatever is left in your meager savings account." Monique covered a laugh with her napkin. Cynthia took a slow sip of her champagne, her eyes gleaming with absolute malice. They expected me to break down. They expected me to cry, to beg, to admit I had absolutely nothing left. I looked at the unfair divorce papers. Then I looked at the $2,000 check meant to erase my child. Finally, I looked at the astronomical restaurant bill. I reached into my coat pocket. I did not pull out the $14 I had scraped together that morning. Instead, I pulled out the sleek, heavy matte black card Arthur Gallagher had handed me just an hour ago. The American Express Centurion card issued directly against my newly established $86 million trust. I placed it gently on the silver tray. The solid titanium hit the metal surface with a distinct heavy clink that echoed through the quiet alcove. The waiter immediately recognized the card. His posture straightened, and he gave a deep, highly respectful nod before whisking the tray away without a single question. Brandon froze entirely. His smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by sheer confusion. As a finance manager, he knew exactly what a Centurion card was. He worshipped money and studied the ultra-wealthy, memorizing their habits and tools. He recognized the matte finish and the distinctive weight of the titanium card. He knew it was strictly by invitation only. He knew it required spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and possessing a massive liquid net worth. Cynthia looked confused by the silence, but Brandon's face drained of all color. "Where did you get that?" Brandon asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. He leaned forward, his eyes darting frantically between my face and the direction the waiter had gone. "Riley, whose card is that?" I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my damp coat. I picked up Cynthia, $2,000 check, and ripped it precisely in half, letting the pieces flutter onto the spilled caviar. "I do not need your charity, Cynthia," I said calmly. Then I looked directly into Brandon's panicked eyes. And Brandon, before you finalize your grand promotion, you might want to check your hospital records. Faking a vasectomy to excuse your infidelity is quite a creative strategy, but clinical logs do not lie. I hope Monique is ready to deal with the fallout when her father learns the truth about exactly who he is promoting. Monique gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Brandon choked on his breath, knocking his heavy chair backward as he tried to stand. I turned and walked away, leaving the unsigned divorce papers sitting on the table. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant, I glanced back. Brandon was not looking at Monique. He was not looking at his outraged mother. He was staring intensely at the spot where the black card had been, his eyes wide with a dangerous, calculating greed. The trap was finally set, and he was walking right into it. I had taken 2 steps toward the glass doors when a sudden thought anchored my feet. Turning back, I looked at Brandon, whose eyes were frantically locked onto the spot where my titanium card had rested. I walked back to his chair, leaning in close enough so only our table could hear. "By the way, Brandon," I said, my voice level, "checking our joint account statements before you locked me out was enlightening." I turned to the impeccably dressed woman beside him, her manicured fingers wrapped around her crystal flute. "I hope Monique loves the $15,000 Cartier necklace you bought her last Tuesday." Monique inhaled sharply, taking a mouthful of champagne. She began coughing violently, her chest heaving as the liquid burned her throat. She slammed the flute down, spilling the golden drink across the white linen. Her face flushed crimson as she stared at Brandon with fury. "You told me that necklace was a family heirloom." She choked out, her voice rising an octave in disbelief. "You told me it belonged to your late grandmother and that you wanted me to have it." Brandon stammered, his hands fluttering uselessly over the table as he tried to placate his boss. "Monique, please, I can explain everything right now." He pleaded, his corporate slickness absent. "It was a misunderstanding, I swear to you." Cynthia slammed her hands against the table, rattling the silver cutlery. "How dare you speak to my son this way?" she hissed at me, her face contorted in aristocratic rage. "You are nothing but a common street rat trying to ruin a good man reputation. Security should throw you out." Before I could open my mouth to defend myself, a sharp voice sliced through the tension from the adjacent table. "Actually, Cynthia, the only person acting like a street rat in this establishment is you." I whipped my head around. Keisha rose elegantly from a plush leather booth just 10 feet away. She was dressed in a sharp tailored navy suit, looking every inch the powerful hospital administrator she was, rather than the exhausted pediatric doctor I had seen at 6 in the morning. 2 men in gray suits sat across from her, watching the drama unfold with captivated eyes. Keisha smoothed her skirt and walked deliberately toward our alcove, her heels clicking a steady rhythm against the floorboards. "Hello, mother-in-law," Keisha said, her voice dripping with lethal politeness. She stopped right behind Cynthia's chair, crossing her arms over her chest. "Correct me if I am wrong, but did you not tell the entire family text thread that you were hosting the Symphony Gala charity luncheon this afternoon? Yet here you are, cornering and harassing a pregnant woman in the middle of a Michelin star restaurant. It is a desperate look for a woman who prides herself on high society manners." Cynthia's jaw dropped. She looked around frantically, suddenly hyper-aware of her surroundings. Keisha's voice had not been quiet. Several heads from neighboring tables had swiveled in our direction. I recognized 2 women sitting at a booth near the window. They were prominent members of the very charity board Cynthia so desperately wanted to lead. They were whispering behind their menus, their eyes locked directly on my humiliated mother-in-law. "Keisha, keep your voice down," Cynthia whispered fiercely, her powdered face draining of color as she noticed her wealthy peers watching her every move. "This is private family business. Do not make a public scene." "You made the scene the moment you tried to force Riley to pay your expensive lunch bill," Keisha countered effortlessly. "I am simply pointing out the hypocrisy. As a medical professional and a decent human being, I find it repulsive that you would attempt to extort a woman carrying your own grandchild. I am friends with the general manager here. I could have security remove you for creating a hostile environment. Would you like me to make that call?" Cynthia shrank back into her plush chair, utterly defeated and visibly shaking. Her high society peers were actively judging her, and in her world, Social death was far worse than actual death. She covered her face with her linen napkin, refusing to look at me, Keisha, or the gaping diners surrounding us. Monique, having completely recovered from her coughing fit, grabbed her designer purse from the floor. She glared at Brandon with a sharp look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Do not ever call me again, Brandon," she snapped loudly. "My father is going to hear exactly what kind of lying, manipulative fraud you truly are. You are finished at the investment firm. Your career is entirely over." Monique stormed away, her heels striking the floor with lethal precision. Brandon sat frozen in his chair, sweating profusely. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire universe collapse in real time. His upcoming promotion, his wealthy mistress, and his mother's social standing had all evaporated in less than 5 minutes. Keisha gave me a brief, triumphant nod before returning to her important business lunch. I offered Brandon one last fleeting smile, turned on my heel, and finally walked out of Le Petit, the cool afternoon air hitting my face like a victorious rush of absolute freedom. But as the heavy glass doors swung shut behind me, I did not see what happened next. Brandon remained seated at the chaotic table, his mind racing. The initial shock of losing Monique was quickly being eclipsed by a much darker, much more desperate realization. He had seen the heavy titanium black card. He worked in high-level finance. He knew with absolute certainty that Riley had somehow gained access to a level of wealth he could scarcely comprehend. With hands trembling slightly, Brandon reached across the spilled champagne and grabbed the stack of unsigned divorce papers. Checking to ensure his humiliated mother was hiding behind her napkin, he methodically ripped the documents into tiny shreds. Brandon did not leave the restaurant immediately. He sat alone in the opulent alcove, staring at the shredded pieces of the divorce agreement scattered across the white linen. The heavy clink of that black titanium card echoed repeatedly in his mind. He knew exactly what it represented. It was not just wealth. It was access to an elite financial stratosphere he had spent his entire career trying to glimpse. The cheating scandal, the fake vasectomy, the cruel eviction, none of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was finding out exactly where Riley had gotten that card. Within an hour, Brandon transferred $5,000 from his personal emergency fund to a ruthless private investigator he knew through his investment firm, Shady Corporate Dealings. The directive was simple. Track Riley every move, find out where she was sleeping, and uncover the source of her sudden impossible fortune. The private investigator did not take long. By late afternoon the next day, Brandon's phone pinged with encrypted messages. He opened the file while sitting in his corner office, locking the heavy glass door. The first photograph showed Riley's old car parked outside a sprawling, ultra-modern high-rise in the most exclusive zip code of the city. The second photo showed white-gloved movers transferring high-end designer luggage from a black luxury vehicle into the building. The third photo zoomed in on Riley stepping out of the vehicle, being greeted with absolute deference by the head concierge. Brandon read the attached text from the investigator. "She just signed a 12-month lease on the top-floor penthouse. The rent is $15,000 a month, paid entirely upfront in cash. The funds were wired from an irrevocable trust account." Brandon gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, his knuckles turning white. An irrevocable trust. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. Thomas. It had to be Thomas. Her dead, supposedly useless first husband had somehow struck gold from the grave, and Riley was the sole beneficiary. But trusts of that magnitude always had release conditions. Brandon's mind raced, piecing together the timeline, the sudden activation of the funds, and the ultrasound photo he had thrown onto the wet black asphalt. The baby. The child he had violently disowned and used as a weapon to secure his promotion was actually the golden key to an absolute fortune. Riley was pregnant, and that pregnancy had unlocked a vault of unimaginable wealth. His greed instantly eclipsed any lingering fear of Monique's wrath or his ruined promotion. The investment firm was suddenly small change compared to the empire Riley was sitting on. He needed to get back into her life, and he needed to do it immediately. Brandon picked up his phone and opened his message thread with Monique. She had been ignoring his calls all morning, furious about the Cartier necklace humiliation. He typed out a message with cold, calculated precision. Monique, I am so sorry about yesterday, but we need to delay our public relationship. My lawyers advised me that Riley is financially unstable and threatening to ruin my career if I leave her right now. I need to handle this delicate legal situation before we can be together. Please give me a week to fix this mess. He hit send without a single ounce of remorse. Monique was nothing but a stepping stone. Riley was the ultimate prize. Brandon left his office early, driving straight to the luxury high-rise the investigator had pinpointed. The glass facade of the building gleamed aggressively in the late afternoon sun, a fortress of extreme wealth. He walked through the rotating doors, immediately adopting the posture of a desperate, heartbroken man. The lobby was an expanse of imported Italian marble and brushed steel. A stern-faced concierge stood behind a massive reception desk, watching Brandon approach with professional suspicion. I need to see my wife, Brandon said, letting his voice crack perfectly. He wiped a fabricated tear from his eye, leaning heavily against the marble desk. Her name is Riley Evans. She just moved into the penthouse today. We had a terrible misunderstanding and she is pregnant with our first child. Please, I just need 5 minutes to apologize to her. I'm terrified for her health and the safety of our precious baby. The concierge maintained a neutral expression, unfazed by the theatrical display of emotion. I am sorry, sir, but the penthouse resident has placed a strict block on all unapproved visitors. I cannot let you up the elevator without her direct authorization. Brandon placed his hands together in a pleading gesture, squeezing his eyes shut to force another tear. You do not understand. The pregnancy hormones, the stress of the move, she is not thinking clearly. I am the father of that child. I have a legal right to make sure they are both safe. Just please call up to the room. Tell her Brandon is here, begging on his knees for her forgiveness. 60 floors above the lobby, I sat on a velvet sofa watching the live security feed on a massive tablet. Brandon's pathetic performance played out in high definition. His fake tears and desperate pleas were repulsive. He truly thought I was naive enough to fall for his sudden reversal. I pressed the intercom button connected directly to the concierge desk. My voice echoed cleanly through the lobby speakers, freezing Brandon in place. Do not let that man anywhere near the elevators, I commanded, my tone completely devoid of emotion. Brandon, save your tears. I will see you in court. Brandon stared at the security camera, his expression twisting from fake sorrow into pure, unhinged malice. He spun around and stormed out of the building. The aggressive lawsuit was a desperate, calculated gamble to siphon my newly acquired wealth. He wanted a grueling war, but he had no idea what was coming. Within 2 hours, he had his lawyers file a highly publicized paternity suit. The highly publicized paternity suit hit the internet before I even had time to pour a cup of coffee the next morning. Brandon did not stop at simply claiming fatherhood. He immediately filed an emergency petition for full legal custody and permanent spousal support. Reading through the legal documents my lawyer forwarded, my blood ran completely cold. Brandon explicitly claimed I was severely mentally unstable. He described me as a volatile, erratic woman who abandoned her loving marriage the moment she secured a hidden financial windfall. He boldly stated to the court that he needed immediate control over my assets. He claimed he needed this control to properly care for his unborn child, painting himself as the protective, responsible father, trying to save his baby from an unhinged mother. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of his legal filings, my phone began vibrating relentlessly on the kitchen counter. Notifications from the National Antique Appraisers Association, former clients and mutual friends, flooded my screen in a rapid, endless stream. It was Cynthia. She had taken to Facebook to launch a coordinated, devastating smear campaign. I opened the application and found a post that had already amassed 10,000 shares. Cynthia had crafted a masterpiece of social manipulation. She wrote a sprawling theatrical tearjerker essay detailing how her absolute saint of a son was willing to graciously forgive his cheating, gold-digging wife. Cynthia explicitly claimed Brandon was desperately trying to keep our fractured family together publicly, offering to raise my illegitimate child as his own, out of pure, unconditional love. She spun a brilliant, sickening narrative of a heartbroken, faithful husband standing bravely by a wife who had completely lost her mind to greed and reckless infidelity. She portrayed my move to the luxury penthouse as absolute proof. She called my new home undeniable proof of my financial abuse and mental decline. The comment section beneath her post was an absolute bloodbath. Local business owners I had worked with for years were calling me a manipulative fraud. My few remaining appraisal contracts evaporated within minutes as angry emails hit my inbox. The entire narrative was perfectly engineered to permanently ruin my professional credibility and paint me as an unstable villain in the eyes of the public and the family court judge. Staring at Cynthia's perfectly crafted digital venom, my mind instantly pulled me back exactly 3 years prior. We were sitting at their massive mahogany dining table for Thanksgiving when Cynthia first discovered I had filed the official paperwork to start my independent antique appraisal business. She did not yell or argue. She simply pulled out her phone, took a terrible candid photo of me in a stained cooking apron, and immediately posted it to her timeline. The caption read that she was so proud of our little Riley playing shopkeeper with dusty junk, while Brandon heroically carries the heavy financial weight of our entire family. She had purposely tagged every single affluent socialite in her extensive network. She had always used public perception as a brutal guillotine, weaponizing her social standing to keep me perfectly subjugated and isolated. Now, she was using the exact same tactic on a massive, highly destructive scale. I did not cry. I did not throw my phone across the room. I calmly walked over to the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, looking down at the crawling city traffic far below, and dialed Keisha's number. Keisha answered on the very first ring. "You saw the post," she stated, her voice sharp and tight with defensive anger. "I saw it entirely. I saw it," I replied, my tone remaining completely dead and flat. "They are trying to aggressively corner me in the court of public opinion before the actual family court date even arrives. Brandon is claiming severe mental instability to seize full custody and gain unrestricted access to the trust fund." Keisha scoffed loudly into the receiver. "They are playing a very dangerous game with the absolute wrong people. Cynthia actually thinks she completely controls the narrative just because she has an expensive country club membership and a loud Facebook account. But she completely forgot one highly crucial detail today. She forgot a crucial detail in her little master plan." "And what exactly is that?" I asked, watching a helicopter navigate through the cloudy skyline. "She completely forgot that I have unrestricted administrative access to the entire hospital medical database," Keisha stated smoothly, the sound of her office chair squeaking in the background. "I am sitting at my desk right now." Keisha continued, the rapid clicking of her computer keyboard echoing sharply through the phone speaker. I decided to dig a little deeper into Brandon's private medical history. Faking a vasectomy was just the appetizer, Riley. I pulled his files. I pulled his full diagnostic workup from the past 5 years. I checked every single clinical note, every blood panel, and every specialist referral. I held my breath, gripping the phone tightly against my ear. "What did you find?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Brandon has been incredibly busy keeping secrets," Keisha said, her voice dropping to a low, highly dangerous whisper. "I just opened his strictly confidential diagnostic reports from a private clinic across town. He is not just a manipulative liar, Riley. We have something far more incriminating than a simply canceled surgery hidden here. It changes the entire legal landscape. He submitted his genetic material to a specialized fertility clinic exactly 4 months ago. I am reading the certified laboratory results right now. Riley Brandon is entirely sterile. It is a severe genetic condition he has known about since his early 20s. He never needed a vasectomy because he could never father a child in the first place. He completely fabricated his outrage over your pregnancy to hide his lifelong medical secret. He is absolutely shooting blanks." I smiled coldly at the glass window. Brandon had just handed me the ultimate legal weapon. Today. I ended the call with Keisha and immediately requested a secure private meeting room on the ground floor of my building. 30 minutes later, Keisha walked through the heavy mahogany doors, carrying a thick manila folder. She locked the door behind her and dropped the files directly onto the polished glass table. The harsh fluorescent lights illuminated the physical proof of Brandon's massive deception. Keisha opened the folder, spreading the documents out with surgical precision. "Here are the access logs," she said, tapping a highlighted row of data. "Brandon did not just lie to you, Riley. He actively committed medical fraud. He paid a junior clinic administrator to forge an attending physician's signature, allowing him to retroactively alter his digital fertility records. He tried to insert a fake vasectomy procedure into his file to explain his absolute sterility, but the junior administrator was sloppy. They left digital footprints across the entire hospital server." I stared at the forged documents. Brandon was so terrified of being exposed as biologically inadequate that he fabricated a surgical history and bribed clinical staff. He had aggressively weaponized his fake vasectomy to accuse me of cheating, knowing all along that he was the one firing blanks. His petition for full custody was not just a greedy cash grab. It was a massive perjury trap, and he had willingly strapped himself right into the electric chair. Before I could even process the magnitude of the medical fraud, the secure room door buzzed. Arthur Gallagher stepped inside, brushing rainwater from his immaculate wool overcoat. He carried his own sleek leather briefcase and wore an expression of dangerous, predatory satisfaction. "I apologize for the intrusion," Riley Arthur said, taking the seat next to Keisha. "But when you asked me to perform a comprehensive defensive audit on your soon-to-be ex-husband, I decided to implement a full forensic sweep of his financial history. What I found demands your immediate attention." Arthur unlatched his briefcase and withdrew a dense stack of financial ledgers. He slid them across the glass. "Brandon has always portrayed himself as a high-rolling financial genius." Arthur began, his tone laced with sharp, aristocratic disgust. "But his actual salary does not even cover the property taxes on your former house." So I asked myself how a mid-level portfolio manager affords custom Italian suits daily, Michelin star lunches, and $15,000 Cartier necklaces for his mistress. I leaned forward, staring at the highlighted bank transfers. "He used our joint credit cards for some of it," I said, tracing the lines of debt. "He told me he maxed them out on bad golf investments." Arthur laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The joint credit cards were merely a drop in the ocean, Riley. Brandon has been systematically embezzling from his own clients. He diverted precisely $250,000 from 3 different elderly client accounts over the past 8 months. He funneled the cash through a dummy corporation registered in his mother's maiden name." Keisha gasped, leaning over the table to inspect the routing numbers. "He stole $250,000 from senior citizens," she asked, her voice tight with absolute revulsion. Arthur nodded, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. He needed the capital to fund his lavish lifestyle and artificially inflate his wealth. He was desperately trying to impress Mr. Harrington Monique's wealthy father to secure that coveted vice president promotion. He used stolen funds to play the part of a Wall Street elite. And the best part is that Cynthia's signature is on the dummy corporation tax filings. She is a direct accessory to major corporate embezzlement. I sat back in my chair, letting the sheer magnitude of their crimes wash over me. Brandon had filed a public custody petition claiming I was mentally unstable and unfit to manage my own finances. He had unleashed his mother to destroy my professional appraisal business on Facebook, painting me as a volatile gold digger. They wanted to humiliate me, starve me out, and strip me of my child to access my trust fund. They did not just want to win a simple divorce. They wanted to bury me entirely. I looked at Keisha and then at Arthur. The fear and panic that had gripped my chest for the past 3 years completely evaporated. In its place, a cold, calculating, absolute resolve took over. "We are not going to simply defend against this paternity suit," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady register. "I do not just want to win the case, Arthur. I want to completely dismantle Brandon's entire financial and social foundation. I want the investment firm to see these embezzlement logs. I want the medical board to see the forged clinic records. I want Cynthia High Society Charity Board to see exactly how she funded her designer lifestyle. I want total, absolute annihilation." Arthur smiled a terrifying, brilliant expression of legal warfare. "Consider it done, Riley. We will let him walk right into the courthouse tomorrow and perjure himself on the official record." Then we dropped the hammer. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with crisp, blinding sunlight. I stood near the massive stone pillars of the county courthouse, wearing a sharp-tailored charcoal suit that projected pure, unbothered power. Keisha stood to my right, and Arthur stood to my left, holding the sealed folders of absolute destruction. A sleek, polished black town car pulled up to the curb. Brandon stepped out first, adjusting his expensive stolen silk tie. Cynthia followed closely behind, wearing a dramatic, oversized hat and carrying a designer handbag purchased with embezzled funds. Brandon spotted me standing on the courthouse steps. A smug, arrogant, highly confident smile spread across his face. He puffed out his chest, looking at me like a conquered peasant. He thought he held all the cards. He thought he was walking into a glorious victory. He was completely unaware that he was stepping directly into a spectacular blazing inferno. The courtroom was frigid, the kind of cold that seemed to seep through the mahogany paneling and settle into the marrow of one's bones. The heavy oak doors swung open with a resounding thud, echoing like a gavel, before the judge had even taken the bench. I felt the collective gaze of the gallery shift toward us. Brandon moved with a calculated, leisurely stride, his expensive charcoal suit tailored to perfection, while Cynthia clung to his arm, her face a mask of simulated maternal concern. They were the picture of a grieving, forgiving family, a narrative they had carefully constructed to manipulate the court and the public. I stood near the defendant's table, my posture rigid, my eyes locked forward. I could hear Cynthia whispering to a reporter in the front row about my supposed mental decline and my inability to cope with the pressure of a real marriage. Her performance was nauseatingly rehearsed, a direct continuation of the online campaign detailed in evidence_smear_campaign. DOCX, which outlined their strategy to portray me as an unfit, unstable mother. The Honorable Judge Vance took the bench, her expression as unyielding as the stone walls surrounding us. The courtroom went silent, the hum of the air conditioning suddenly loud in the vacuum. Brandon's high-priced counsel, a man named Sterling, whose smile held all the warmth of a shark, stood up and smoothed his lapels. He began his opening statement with a chilling precision that made the hair on my arms stand up. He painted me not as a woman who had fought to escape an abusive environment, but as a manipulative, cold-hearted mastermind who had deceived her husband to siphon off a hidden massive fortune. He spoke of my erratic behavior and my suspicious move into the penthouse as if it were a confession of guilt rather than an act of survival. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained still on the table. Beside me, Gallagher didn't flinch, his eyes fixed on Sterling's every gesture. Sterling's rhetoric focused on my alleged mental instability, using the selective framing from evidence_smear_campaign.docx to make my independent success look like a byproduct of a fractured mind. He argued that Brandon was a man of impeccable character and unwavering devotion, willing to overlook my supposed infidelity and even raise another man's child just to keep the family unit intact for the sake of the unborn baby. It was a lie so profound it had its own gravitational pull. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Brandon took the stand. He walked with a slight practiced limp, a subtle touch to emphasize his grief over our failing marriage. As he sat, he adjusted his tie and looked at me with an expression of heartbreaking sorrow, a perfect reflection of the claims made in Brandon_reconciliation_claims.docx, which highlighted his performative desire to reconcile for the sake of the unborn heir. He began his testimony in a voice barely above a whisper. He talked about how much he loved me, how he had ignored red flags about my business dealings because he was blinded by love, and how he had been willing to forgive my transgressions with an unknown partner, provided I agreed to his terms. "I just want to be a father," he croaked, looking at the judge with glistening eyes. "I know this child might not be mine, but I have loved Riley for years. I am willing to raise this baby as my own to keep our family together." I am worried for her, Your Honor. She isn't herself. The money, the secrecy, it's not the woman I married. I watched the judge. Her brow furrowed, a flicker of sympathy crossing her face. Cynthia in the gallery sniffled audibly, her performance earning the expected murmurs of support from the small cluster of people they had invited. The room felt like a stage set, and Brandon was delivering the monologue of a lifetime. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping, "I just want what's best for the baby." Gallagher finally stood. He didn't look angry. He looked bored, as if he were watching a bad play he had already seen a dozen times. He walked toward the witness stand with the slow, deliberate pace of a predator circling wounded prey. The gallery quieted, sensing the shift in momentum. "Mr. Evans," Gallagher began, his voice dry and devoid of its usual warmth, "you testified that your primary motivation for filing this paternity suit is to ensure the safety and well-being of the unborn child, correct?" "Yes, that's correct," Brandon replied, meeting Gallagher's gaze with practiced sincerity. "And you have stated under oath that your desire to reconcile and be a father to this child is born out of a genuine lifelong commitment to Riley, despite the alleged infidelity that led to this pregnancy." "I have. My love for her is unconditional." Gallagher turned, picking up a thick manila folder from our table, the one Keisha had delivered. He pulled out the documents described in initial_medical_evidence_logs.docx, which clearly outlined the medical evidence we had gathered. He turned back to the stand, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Evans, in your testimony, you've made it very clear that you consider yourself the rightful father figure, implying a biological or at least a familial connection. You've also previously discussed your fertility with the court, citing a past surgical procedure to manage your health." Brandon hesitated, his confidence flickering for a microsecond. "I have, yes. And that procedure, as you've testified in your pre-trial depositions, was a vasectomy performed to manage your health issues." "Yes, that's correct." "And you're certain about that, Brandon, under oath?" Gallagher's voice tightened, becoming dangerously sharp. "You're certain that you underwent this procedure and that it rendered you incapable of fathering a child?" "I am." Brandon looked slightly annoyed. "Why are we going over this again? It's a matter of medical record." "Actually, that's exactly what I want to establish," Gallagher said, his voice ringing through the silent room. He stepped closer to the stand, holding up the medical records that were legally verified in certified_medical_records.docx. "Mr. Evans, I would like you to confirm for the record the exact date of this vasectomy." Brandon's smug smile finally faltered. He looked at Sterling, then back at Gallagher, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. It was a few years ago. I don't recall the specific date." "Let me refresh your memory, Brandon." Gallagher didn't wait. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor, the witness is under oath. I am asking him to confirm the date of the surgery he claims to have had. A simple date. Surely for a man so concerned about his future child, a date of such significance shouldn't be difficult to recall." The air in the courtroom vanished. Brandon sat frozen, the weight of the trap he had walked into becoming clear. The perjury was not just a possibility, it was an inevitability. Brandon swallowed hard, but quickly plastered his arrogant mask back onto his face. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with extreme condescension. "October 14th, 2020. That is the exact date of my vasectomy," he stated, crossing his arms and glaring at Gallagher. He sounded so incredibly certain, so violently arrogant, that a lesser attorney might have hesitated. Gallagher did not hesitate. He simply turned back to the defense table, retrieved a legally certified medical file, and handed it directly to the bailiff. "Your Honor, I present Exhibit A." Gallagher announced, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "These are the authentic, unadulterated medical records from the exact fertility clinic Mr. Evans just cited." The bailiff handed the heavy file to Judge Vance. As you will see on page 4, Gallagher continued pacing slowly in front of the witness stand. Mr. Evans did indeed schedule a vasectomy for October 14th. However, he never actually went through with the surgical procedure. The clinic notes clearly state that Mr. Evans suffered a severe panic attack in the waiting room, refused the local anesthesia, and completely canceled the appointment. He never had the surgery because he was too terrified of the needle. The heavy silence in the courtroom was broken only by the sharp rustle of paper as Judge Vance flipped through the certified clinic logs. Her expression shifted rapidly from sympathetic maternal concern to absolute freezing disgust. She glared over her reading glasses at Brandon, who was now clutching the edges of the witness stand with white knuckles. "You sat in my courtroom and swore under penalty of perjury that you underwent a surgical procedure to prevent pregnancy," the judge stated, her voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "You used that fabricated medical history to publicly accuse your wife of infidelity." Brandon opened his mouth, stammering out fractured, incoherent syllables, but Gallagher cut him off with brutal efficiency. "We are not finished, Your Honor," Gallagher said, retrieving a second sealed envelope from Keisha. "Since Mr. Evans so aggressively demanded a court-mandated paternity test to prove his malicious allegations of infidelity, we expedited the laboratory processing." Gallagher handed the sealed DNA results to the bailiff. "I present Exhibit B, the official genetically certified paternity results." Judge Vance ripped open the envelope. She read the bold print, her jaw tightening. "The laboratory confirms a 99.9% probability," she announced loudly. "Brandon Evans is the biological father of the unborn child." Cynthia gasped loudly from the gallery, her entire socialite facade crumbling into absolute horror. She had spent weeks broadcasting my supposed infidelity to every wealthy country club member in the state, and now the court had just legally declared her son a pathological liar. But Gallagher was a legal executioner, and he was not done swinging the heavy axe. "Your Honor," the plaintiff intentionally fabricated this cheating accusation for one highly specific reason, Gallagher declared, pulling a thick stack of printed transcripts from his leather briefcase. He wanted to illegally evict his pregnant wife, seize total control of their marital assets, and clear the path for his mistress. "I present Exhibit C." Gallagher slammed the transcripts onto the evidence podium. "These are subpoenaed text messages between Brandon Evans and his current mistress, Monique Harrington. The timestamps date back 8 months. Let me read a specific exchange from the night before my client was brutally thrown out of her own home." Gallagher adjusted his glasses, his voice ringing with theatrical precision. Mr. Evans texts Monique, "I finally figured out how to get rid of Riley without giving her half the house. I am going to fake a vasectomy paper and claim the baby is a bastard. I will pack her bags tonight. We can move you in by Friday." The courtroom erupted into total chaos. Reporters in the back row began typing frantically, their keyboards clattering like rapid gunfire. Cynthia buried her face in her manicured hands, realizing that her golden child had just legally incinerated their entire family reputation. Brandon sat paralyzed on the wooden witness stand. The sympathetic, heartbroken husband routine was dead and buried. He looked at Sterling, his highly paid attorney, but Sterling was furiously rubbing his temples, completely unprepared for this massive evidentiary ambush. Then something terrifying happened. The panic on his face instantly vanished. The fake tears dried up completely. His posture shifted from a defeated, grieving man into something rigid, cold, and utterly sociopathic. He leaned back in the witness chair, casually adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He looked directly at me, his eyes dead and hollow, completely devoid of any human empathy. He did not look like a man who had just been caught committing severe perjury. He looked like a predator analyzing a new hunting strategy. He slowly turned his head to face the judge, a chilling serpentine smile stretching across his face. The benevolent father act was gone. The mask had finally slipped, revealing the monster underneath. "You see, Your Honor," Brandon said, his tone entirely devoid of the faux warmth he had projected mere minutes prior. He did not sound like a broken man. He sounded like an accountant discussing a minor clerical error. "I simply did what was necessary to protect my assets. My wife had grown unmanageable. She refused to play her proper role. I needed a clean exit strategy that favored my financial portfolio." The court gallery gasped in collective disbelief. Even his own lawyer Sterling stood up and attempted to interject, waving his hands frantically to stop his client from speaking. But Brandon ignored him, completely intoxicated by his own twisted sense of superiority. He leaned forward again, staring directly at me with cold, unblinking eyes. "I built this family, Riley," he stated smoothly. "If I wanted to tear it down to build something better with Monique, that was my absolute right. You were simply an obstacle blocking my rightful path forward. I watched him seal his fate permanently, today." Judge Vance slammed her heavy wooden gavel down so hard the sharp crack echoed like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. Her face was flushed with absolute unadulterated fury. She stared down at Brandon as if he were a poisonous insect that had just crawled across her mahogany desk. "We are taking a 15-minute recess," she declared, her voice slicing through the heavy air with brutal authority. "I strongly suggest counsel takes this time to advise his client on the severe penalties for perjury, fraud, and wasting the valuable time of this court. We are adjourned." She stood up and marched into her chambers. The heavy oak doors swung open, spilling the courtroom occupants into the sprawling marble corridor. The atmosphere was immediately suffocating. Reporters scrambled for their phones, dialing editors in a frantic rush to break the explosive story. Local socialites, the very same women Cynthia had personally invited to witness my absolute destruction, huddled in tight circles, whispering fiercely, while casting disgusted glares toward the defense team. I stepped out into the hallway with Gallagher and Keisha. We leaned casually against the cool stone wall, maintaining a perfectly composed distance. Brandon marched out of the double doors, his face a furious shade of crimson. He was sweating profusely, the confident facade completely melted away. Cynthia scurried after him, her heels clicking frantically against the polished floor. She grabbed his arm, her manicured fingers digging into his expensive suit. "Brandon, what on earth are you doing in there?" she hissed loudly, completely abandoning her refined country club etiquette. "You are ruining everything. You are making us look like absolute fools." Brandon violently ripped his arm out of her grasp. His eyes were wild, darting around the crowded corridor like a cornered rabid animal. "I am making us look like fools," he shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. People turned their heads, completely mesmerized by the sudden implosion of the Evans family. "You are the one who told me to do this. You are the one who engineered this entire pathetic disaster." Cynthia gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. Her face drained of all color, her jaw dropping open in absolute horror. "Brandon, keep your voice down," she pleaded, glancing frantically at the reporters who were now actively recording the meltdown on their phones. "We can fix this. Just let Sterling handle the judge." "There is no fixing this," Brandon roared, leaning down to get right into his mother's face. He threw his hands up in the air, completely unhinged. It was her idea. He yelled, pointing a shaking finger directly at Cynthia so the entire hallway could hear. "She told me to kick Riley out. She told me to fake the vasectomy story so I could marry Monique and secure the promotion. She said we could legally seize the trust fund and freeze Riley out completely." The collective gasp from the surrounding crowd sucked all the oxygen out of the corridor. Cynthia stood frozen, her eyes wide with sheer panic as her golden boy brutally tossed her straight under the oncoming bus. She had spent her entire life meticulously cultivating an image of pristine high society elegance. In 10 seconds, Brandon had reduced her to a common scheming criminal in front of her most important peers. Cynthia raised her hand and delivered a vicious, echoing slap directly across Brandon's face. The sharp smack silenced the entire hallway. A bright red handprint instantly bloomed across his left cheek. "You ungrateful, pathetic little boy," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unrestrained rage. "I gave you the exact blueprint to secure our financial future. I handed you an $86 million bag on a silver platter, and you fumbled it because you are too arrogant to follow simple instructions." "You told me the medical records were secure," Brandon yelled back, clutching his stinging cheek. "You promised me the clinic administrator destroyed the original files. You said we had the perfect legal strategy to take the baby and the money." "You perjured yourself on the stand, you absolute idiot!" Cynthia shrieked, completely losing her mind. "You arrogant fool! You just handed her the victory. I compromised my entire charity board. I committed corporate embezzlement to fund your pathetic lifestyle because you cannot even afford your own car payments. I risked federal prison to help you steal that $86 million fortune, and you just confessed to the judge. I watched the spectacular implosion from 10 feet away, feeling nothing but profound, icy satisfaction. Keisha leaned against the marble pillar next to me, casually sipping an iced coffee she had procured from the courthouse cafeteria. She took a slow, loud slurp through her plastic straw, raising an eyebrow at the screaming match. I really should have brought popcorn for this, Keisha remarked, her tone utterly deadpan. They are eating each other alive. Gallagher chuckled softly, checking his gold pocket watch. The 15 minutes are almost up. Let us get back inside and finish the job. Brandon, breathing heavily and glaring at his mother with absolute hatred, turned his back on her. He straightened his tie, his hands visibly shaking, and stormed away from the crowd. He pushed through the heavy wooden doors and marched back into the courtroom. I followed behind him, taking my seat by Gallagher. The gallery flooded back in, buzzing with anticipation. Brandon slumped into the defense chair. Sterling, his lawyer, leaned over his face, pale and strained. Brandon, we need to negotiate a surrender immediately, Sterling whispered urgently. We need to mitigate the perjury charges before the judge throws you in jail. Brandon's eyes darkened, locking onto me across the aisle. His sociopathic greed instantly overpowered his panic. No, Brandon hissed, his voice cold, steady, and dripping with malicious intent. Fine. I am the biological father. That means I have full parental rights. And since she is sitting on $86 million, that means I am entitled to child support from a millionaire. Judge Vance returned to the bench, her black robes billowing like a dark storm cloud. The tension in the room was palpable, sharp enough to cut solid glass. Brandon sat next to Sterling, his cheeks still blazing red from Cynthia's hallway assault. But the panic that had consumed him minutes ago was entirely gone, replaced by a calculating, venomous greed. Sterling stood up, smoothing his expensive lapels, pivoting his entire legal strategy with whiplash-inducing speed. He addressed the court formally, withdrawing the prior contestation of paternity. He then submitted a highly aggressive, newly drafted emergency petition. He formally requested $50,000 a month in child support and permanent spousal maintenance. Sterling weaponized the state family law statutes with absolute surgical precision. He cited the massive, undeniable income disparity between Brandon, a supposedly struggling portfolio manager, and myself, a woman sitting on an $86 million fortune. He argued that the state law mandated the higher-earning spouse to maintain the standard of living for the minor child and the dependent spouse. He painted Brandon as a devoted, financially disadvantaged father who needed immediate financial support to provide a stable environment for his newly claimed biological child. The sheer audacity of the pivot was entirely breathtaking. They were attempting a literal legal shakedown right in front of the judge. Brandon shifted in his heavy wooden chair, leaning slightly toward my defense table. The court reporter was busy typing, and Sterling was handing copies of the petition to the bailiff. Brandon locked his dead, hollow eyes onto mine. A sickening, triumphant smirk stretched across his bruised face. "You can keep the millions, Riley," he whispered, his voice low enough to avoid the microphone, but clear enough to pierce straight through my composure. "But you will be writing me a massive fat check every single month for the next 18 years. I win either way. You cannot possibly escape me." He leaned back, adjusting his expensive silk tie, looking incredibly pleased with his sociopathic pivot. He truly believed he had found the ultimate legal loophole. He did not care about the unborn baby at all. He did not care about our completely shattered marriage. He only saw an 18-year meal ticket, a permanent, unbreakable pipeline directly into my private bank account. He thought he had successfully weaponized the family court system to guarantee his wealthy lifestyle regardless of his severe perjury, his blatant medical fraud, or his mother's destroyed reputation. He was banking entirely on the rigid, inflexible nature of state child support guidelines to force me into funding his existence. A cold, creeping dread began to pool deep in my stomach as I watched Judge Vance review the freshly printed petition. She adjusted her glasses, her brow furrowing deeply as she read through Sterling's cited legal precedents. The terrible reality of the situation hit me like a heavy physical blow. The judge was absolutely furious with Brandon's earlier perjury, but family court law regarding child support was notoriously strict and unforgiving. It operated on rigid financial calculators and stark mathematical formulas, prioritizing the child's standard of living above the moral failings of the parents. Judge Vance sighed heavily, looking over the documents with highly visible reluctance. She addressed the silent courtroom, stating that while she found Mr. Evans' sudden reversal highly unorthodox and deeply concerning the court, was legally obligated to consider the massive financial disparity between the biological parents. The state statutes heavily favored wealth redistribution to ensure the child's fundamental welfare. For a terrifying, suffocating moment, it looked like Brandon was actually going to win this twisted game. He had seemingly found a legitimate legal loophole to aggressively drain my funds. He was going to use my own child as a financial hostage, turning my incredible hidden windfall into his personal, unlimited automatic teller machine. The sickening thought of writing him a $50,000 check every single month, blindly funding his luxurious life with Monique, while he publicly played the victim, made me physically nauseous. He would use my grandfather's hard-earned money to buy designer clothes, expensive cars, and lavish vacations for the woman who helped destroy my marriage. I looked over at Keisha, who was gripping the edge of the polished glass table, her jaw clenched tight with defensive rage. She glared at Brandon, looking completely ready to launch herself across the courtroom aisle and physically assault him. Then I looked at Gallagher. My brilliant, highly predatory attorney was not panicking. He was not sweating. He was not frantically flipping through his legal textbooks, searching for an obscure defense strategy. In fact, Arthur Gallagher was smiling. It was a slow, dangerously sharp smile that promised absolute and total devastation. He calmly unlatched his sleek leather briefcase, the metallic click echoing sharply in the incredibly tense courtroom. He reached inside and deliberately withdrew a single, extraordinarily thick, immaculately bound document adorned with a heavy gold wax seal. Gallagher stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with a chilling, calculated slowness. "Your Honor," Gallagher said, his deep voice ringing with pure, unadulterated confidence. Opposing counsel makes a truly fascinating argument regarding marital assets and massive income disparity. However, his entire petition relies heavily on a fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding of my client's actual financial portfolio. He approached the wooden bench holding the sealed document like a loaded weapon. He was actively preparing to present the highly specific, ironclad wording of Thomas's irrevocable trust. The master trap was finally springing completely shut. Brandon's confident, predatory smirk began to falter ever so slightly. He did not know the intricacies of my grandfather's vast wealth, nor did he understand the formidable ironclad conditions attached to the massive inheritance. He foolishly assumed he could simply demand a massive slice of the pie. He failed to comprehend that he was entirely outmatched by a dead billionaire's brilliant legal foresight. Brandon swallowed hard, a tiny bead of cold sweat forming. Gallagher cleared his throat, his eyes gleaming with intellectual victory, fully ready to legally execute the greedy, deceitful portfolio manager. Gallagher cleared his throat, his eyes gleaming with intellectual victory, fully ready to legally execute the greedy, deceitful portfolio manager. He broke the heavy gold wax seal with a sharp snap, unfolding the crisp, thick parchment of my grandfather's final legal directive. Your Honor, Mr. Evans's petition for $50,000 a month relies on the assumption that my client possesses an $86 million personal net worth. Gallagher began, his voice projecting flawlessly across the silent gallery. I submit Exhibit D into evidence. This is the finalized irrevocable trust established by the late Thomas Vance. I draw your attention to Section 4, Paragraph 2. Judge Vance accepted the document from the bailiff, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. Gallagher did not wait for her to finish. The $86 million fortune does not belong to Riley Evans. It never has. My client is not the beneficiary. She is solely the executor, the legally appointed trustee and guardian of the estate. The exclusive singular beneficiary of the entire $86 million is the unborn child. Brandon's smug expression froze his eyes, darting frantically towards Sterling. The highly paid defense attorney snatched a copy of the trust from the bailiff, scanning the pages with mounting horror. Gallagher continued his merciless assault. Thomas Vance despised wealth-digging spouses. He explicitly engineered this generational trust to bypass my client's personal accounts entirely. The money is locked in an ironclad financial fortress. Riley cannot spend it on herself, and she certainly cannot be forced to surrender it to a fraudulent, perjuring, estranged husband. Sterling stood up, his face a mask of panicked desperation. Objection, Your Honor. My client is still the biological father of the sole beneficiary. Furthermore, Mrs. Evans clearly sustains a lavish lifestyle. She resides in a penthouse. She manages the capital. That constitutes income, which is subject to state spousal support calculations. Gallagher laughed, a dry, cutting sound that dismissed Sterling's entire career. Wrong again, counselor. As the legally appointed trustee, my client draws an operational stipend strictly limited to managing the estate's corporate holdings. On paper, under state tax laws, Riley Evans earns precisely $36,000 a year. Her housing is a corporate asset owned by the trust. Her vehicle is a corporate lease. She has zero personal liquid wealth. Therefore, her personal income is drastically lower than the six-figure salary Mr. Evans earns at his prestigious financial firm. Gallagher turned slowly, looking directly at Brandon. You cannot bleed a trust fund you have no legal claim to, and you cannot demand spousal maintenance from a woman who technically earns less than a shift manager at a fast food restaurant. You wanted to use state formulas, Mr. Evans. The formula dictates that you actually owe my client child support. Brandon gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning pure white. The realization slammed into him with the force of a freight train. His master plan, his brilliant 18-year extortion scheme, had just been completely pulverized by a dead man's legal brilliance. He had publicly confessed to fraud, alienated his mother, and destroyed his reputation, all for absolutely nothing. The $86 million bag was utterly untouchable. Before Brandon could even process the magnitude of his total financial ruin, Gallagher reached back into his briefcase. He pulled out a fresh stack of legal filings, his posture shifting from defensive to violently offensive. Your Honor, since Mr. Evans has so graciously admitted to biological paternity on the official court record, we are filing an immediate cross-petition. I am formally requesting the absolute permanent termination of Brandon Evans's parental rights. Sterling gasped, but Gallagher's voice overpowered him, hammering every word like a nail into Brandon's coffin. We have established today, through Mr. Evans's own arrogant confession and certified medical records, a profound pattern of malicious endangerment and severe financial abuse. He intentionally fabricated a medical procedure. He utilized that calculated lie to violently evict his pregnant, vulnerable wife from her legal residence with zero financial resources. He conspired with his mistress to seize marital assets and deliberately endanger the physical and emotional welfare of my client and her unborn child. Judge Vance was nodding slowly, her eyes burning with righteous judicial anger as she stared at Brandon. Furthermore, Gallagher boomed, Mr. Evans committed blatant premeditated perjury in this very courtroom today. He has demonstrated severe sociopathic tendencies, a total lack of moral fitness, and a terrifying willingness to use a child as a pawn for financial extortion. He is an active danger to my client and this baby. Judge Vance did not need to hear another word. She struck her gavel with deafening finality. Petition for spousal maintenance and child support from Mr. Evans is unequivocally denied, she declared, her voice radiating absolute contempt. The trust supersedes your extortion attempt. Furthermore, based on the abhorrent, fraudulent behavior exhibited today, I am placing Mr. Evans's parental rights under severe, immediate judicial review. I am also forwarding the transcripts of today's proceedings directly to the District Attorney's Office for a criminal perjury investigation. Do not leave the state, Mr. Evans. We are adjourned. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic frenzy of noise. Brandon slumped forward, his head resting on the heavy wooden table, utterly broken. He had walked into the courthouse expecting a massive payday and walked out facing potential prison time, zero parental rights, and absolute public humiliation. The perfect family illusion was dead. But I was not finished. I stood up smoothly, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. I walked around the defense table and stopped right beside Brandon's chair. He slowly raised his head, looking at me with bloodshot, defeated eyes. He had nothing left to say. You failed, Brandon. You lost the money, you lost the baby, and you lost your mother. But you still have your precious career, do you not? Enjoy your weekend. I smiled, leaning close. Because on Monday morning, I am buying your firm, firing you. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom closed behind me, shutting out the chaotic frenzy of reporters and the pathetic sight of Brandon's collapse. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. I stepped into the waiting town car, the plush leather interior offering a brief moment of quiet before the real work began. Gallagher sat across from me, his tablet already out, his mind racing ahead to our next tactical maneuver. Keisha sat beside me, her eyes gleaming with excitement. The drive back to the penthouse was swift, the city blurring past the tinted windows. As soon as the private elevator doors opened into my foyer, I dropped my coat onto a chair and turned to Gallagher. I want a shell corporation established by tomorrow morning, I instructed, my voice sharp and decisive. Completely untraceable to my name or the primary trust. Use whatever legal proxies are necessary, but ensure I have absolute control over all financial transactions. Gallagher paused, his fingers hovering over his screen. A shell corporation, Riley, the trust is secure. Brandon cannot touch your assets. You have already neutralized his immediate threat. Brandon's immediate threat was his attempt to steal my grandfather's money, I replied, walking over to the windows overlooking the skyline. But his actual power, his ego is deeply rooted in his career. He still thinks he has a safety net. He thinks he can walk back into his firm, marry his boss's daughter, and live a life of luxury. I am going to remove the net. Keisha grinned, sinking onto the velvet sofa. You are going after Harrington Investments. I am going to consume Harrington Investments, I clarified. Mr. Harrington owns the fund and Monique is his heir. Brandon believes that connection makes him untouchable. I need that shell corporation operational because we are going hunting. Meanwhile, oblivious to the financial guillotine swinging toward his neck, Brandon returned to the sleek, glass-walled offices of Harrington Investments. Despite his legal humiliation in family court, his narcissism convinced him the damage could be contained. He walked through the bustling trading floor with his signature arrogant stride, flashing his charismatic smile at the junior analysts. He adjusted his silk tie, utterly convinced that his relationship with Monique Harrington rendered him immune to any professional consequences. He bypassed his office and headed straight for the executive suite. Mr. Harrington, a stern titan of the financial sector, sat behind a desk. Brandon knocked lightly, stepping inside with the smooth, calculated charm of a seasoned con artist. He immediately launched into a fabricated narrative regarding the court proceedings, painting himself as the tragic victim of a greedy ex-wife and a biased judicial system. He played the martyr flawlessly, ensuring Harrington viewed him not as a liability, but as a loyal company man. The personal matters are handled, sir. Brandon lied smoothly, taking a seat opposite the CEO. My focus remains here on the firm's future, and of course on Monique. I am fully prepared to step into the vice president role and manage the upcoming restructuring. Harrington nodded slowly, blinded by Brandon's dedication and his daughter's infatuation. Good. We need strong leadership right now, Brandon. The market has been brutal and our commercial real estate portfolio is bleeding capital. I need you ready to take the helm. Brandon smirked, tasting the impending promotion, unaware that the bleeding capital Harrington mentioned was exactly what I was currently targeting. Back in my penthouse, my dining table was buried under stacks of financial disclosures and redacted insider reports provided by Keisha's network. The documents outlined in Harrington _financial_audit.docs revealed exactly how Harrington Investments operated. They were over-leveraged, suffocating, under a massive portfolio of toxic commercial real estate and bad debt. I stared at the spreadsheets, a cold memory flashing through my mind. I remembered standing in our old kitchen, examining a rare vase I had sourced for an auction. Brandon had walked in, scoffed at my magnifying glass, and sneered. "I move millions in liquid assets every day. Riley and you sit around appraising dusty garbage. You are playing shopkeeper while I am building real wealth." He was a fool. Appraising antiques is not just looking at old objects. It is identifying hidden structural flaws, recognizing counterfeit facades, and determining the true underlying value of a distressed asset. I applied that same methodology to Harrington's corporate structure. I analyzed their debt ledgers with the precision of an authenticator examining a forged painting. The data compiled in Harrington_corporate_audit.docs confirmed my theory. Harrington Investments was a hollow shell trying to hide its vulnerabilities behind a prestigious name. Their equity was tanking, and their creditors were growing anxious. "They are drowning?" I murmured. "Mr. Harrington has disguised the losses, but the firm is on the verge of defaulting. Their primary creditors are looking to offload the debt for pennies on the dollar just to escape the sinking ship." Gallagher looked up from his laptop. "If your shell corporation buys that distressed debt, you become their primary creditor." "I do not just want the leash," I stated. "I want the entire collar." Using the newly established proxy corporation, I authorized a series of rapid, aggressive financial maneuvers. Armed with the liquid capital from the operational side of my trust, my shell company began quietly and ruthlessly buying up Harrington's struggling debt. We absorbed their commercial mortgages, purchased their outstanding corporate bonds, and swept up their depreciating equity shares from nervous private investors. The precise transaction records verified in hostile_takeover_records.docx documented the speed of the hostile takeover. Within 48 hours, the landscape of Brandon's professional world had fundamentally shifted. I stood by the window in the dark, silently watching the bright city lights flicker. The final email confirmation finally pinged loudly on my phone, containing the secure legal transfer documents outlined in Harrington_liquidation_assets.docx. By acquiring exactly 51% of their total debt and equity, I had just become the silent majority stakeholder of the firm overnight. Friday morning arrived with a crisp, biting chill that perfectly matched the atmosphere I was about to create. Inside the towering glass and steel monolith that housed Harrington Investments, Brandon walked off the private executive elevator with the swagger of a newly crowned king. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, running a hand over his perfectly styled hair. He believed this was the culmination of his grand strategy. Despite the catastrophic public humiliation in family court 2 days prior, he had managed to compartmentalize his failures, convincing himself that his professional life remained entirely insulated from the wreckage of his marriage. He truly believed his relationship with Monique was a golden ticket, an impenetrable shield against any real consequences. He pushed through the double glass doors of the primary executive boardroom. The room was a monument to corporate intimidation, featuring a massive polished mahogany table surrounded by high-backed leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the financial district. Brandon took his usual seat near the head of the table, his posture radiating unearned confidence. Monique sat directly across from him, her posture equally arrogant. She offered him a conspiratorial, secretive smile, gently tapping her manicured fingernails against a leather-bound portfolio. She was utterly convinced she was about to watch her lover receive the promotion they had aggressively plotted for months. At the absolute head of the table sat Mr. Harrington. The titan of industry looked physically diminished, his skin pale and his shoulders visibly sagging beneath the weight of his bespoke suit. He did not share the celebratory energy radiating from his daughter and her boyfriend. He stared down at his folded hands, his face a grim mask of silent resignation. Brandon, entirely oblivious to the heavy, suffocating tension radiating from his superior, leaned back and casually unbuttoned his suit jacket. He placed his expensive fountain pen on the table, eagerly awaiting the formal announcement of his elevation to vice president. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. The dry, raspy sound echoed sharply across the silent room. He looked up, his eyes briefly meeting Brandon's before darting away. "Thank you both for being here early this morning." Harrington began, his voice lacking his usual booming authority. "As you are both acutely aware, our firm has faced unprecedented structural challenges over the last 3 quarters. Our commercial real estate portfolio sustained catastrophic losses, and our debt-to-equity ratio reached a critical, unsustainable tipping point. We were quite frankly standing on the absolute precipice of total financial insolvency." Brandon nodded sagely, projecting the image of a deeply concerned, loyal executive. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "We navigated the storm," Sir Brandon offered smoothly, his voice dripping with sycophantic praise. "We tightened the operational budgets and we held the line. I am ready to implement the new restructuring phases we discussed." Harrington shook his head slowly, a bitter, defeated sigh escaping his lips. "No, Brandon. We did not navigate the storm. We were completely engulfed by it. The only reason our doors are open today is because a private equity firm aggressively purchased 51% of our distressed corporate debt and actively bought out our nervous minority shareholders over the past 48 hours. We have been bailed out, but at a massive structural cost." Monique frowned, her perfect brow furrowing in deep confusion. She leaned toward her father. "Bailed out, Dad? What are you talking about? Who bought the debt?" "We are no longer a privately held family entity," Monique Harrington stated, his voice cracking slightly under the strain. "We have a new silent majority stakeholder. This individual now possesses total controlling interest over Harrington Investments. They dictate our operational budget, our executive compensation packages, and our entire corporate trajectory. I called this emergency meeting because the new owner is arriving this morning to personally oversee the immediate restructuring of our entire executive board." Brandon's smile widened, completely misreading the situation. He assumed this new corporate overlord would obviously recognize his immense value. He sat up straighter, mentally preparing his brilliant elevator pitch. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the far end of the boardroom swung open with a heavy thud. The sound cracked through the tense silence like a physical blow. I stepped into the room. I wore a sharp, perfectly tailored dark charcoal maternity suit that cost more than Brandon's vehicle, my posture radiating absolute unyielding authority. I did not look like the broken, discarded, pregnant wife they had mocked and evicted. I looked like a corporate executioner. Arthur Gallagher walked precisely one step behind my right shoulder, carrying a slim leather briefcase, his face set in a cold, predatory mask. The entire atmosphere in the room violently imploded. Brandon's smug smile instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, pallid gray. His hands spasmed and the silver fountain pen he had been holding slipped through his trembling fingers, clattering loudly onto the polished mahogany table and rolling onto the floor. Monique gasped, her eyes widening in absolute shock as she stared at me. She looked wildly from me to her father, completely unable to process how the woman she had actively plotted to destroy was currently walking into her family's highly secure corporate sanctuary. Mr. Harrington simply lowered his head, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. I walked with deliberate precision down the length of the massive table. Every single footstep echoed loudly against the hardwood floor, measuring the exact duration of Brandon's impending professional death. He sat paralyzed in his chair, his jaw hanging slightly open, his mind trying to rationalize an impossible reality. I did not stop at a guest chair. I did not wait for an invitation to speak. I walked directly past a trembling Monique and a devastated Mr. Harrington. I pulled out the oversized leather chair at the absolute head of the table. I sat down, folded my hands, and locked eyes with my terrified ex-husband. I held Brandon's terrified gaze for exactly 3 seconds before breaking eye contact. I dismissed him entirely, treating his presence with the same level of concern one might give a smudge on a window pane. I did not speak to him. I did not acknowledge the pathetic choked sound that escaped his throat as he tried to form a coherent sentence. Instead, I turned my attention to the center of the table. Gallagher, moving with practiced lethal efficiency, retrieved a slim black cable from his briefcase and connected my encrypted tablet directly into the boardroom's primary projection system. The massive digital screen covering the entire far wall hummed to life, casting a harsh, bright white light across the polished mahogany. Brandon shifted violently in his chair, desperation bleeding through his pores. "Mr. Harrington, sir, you cannot possibly allow this. This woman is unstable. She is a hostile, vindictive ex-wife trying to ruin my life because I left her." Mr. Harrington remained absolutely silent, staring at the glowing screen. I ignored Brandon's frantic outburst completely. I tapped the surface of my tablet and the firm's highly classified internal financial audit appeared on the wall in towering, undeniable high definition. "Good morning, gentlemen," I stated, my voice echoing with icy, absolute authority. "My name is Riley Evans. As the newly established majority stakeholder of Harrington Investments, I am bypassing the traditional strategic overview this morning. We are not here to discuss market share, operational restructuring, or future capital investments. We are here to conduct a forensic corporate autopsy." I swiped across my screen, bringing up the firm's internal ledger. Row after row of dense financial data cascaded down the wall. Brandon swallowed hard, a visible bead of sweat rolling down his pale temple. He recognized the specific files. They were the highly restricted, heavily encrypted accounts he thought no one but the senior accounting directors could access. Over the past 72 hours, my team has meticulously evaluated the structural vulnerabilities of this firm. I continued, highlighting a specific block of data in glaring, vibrant crimson. "While investigating your massive, over-leveraged commercial real estate debt, my forensic accountants discovered a separate, much more insidious anomaly. I draw your attention to the firm's primary client escrow accounts." I zoomed in on the red highlighted section. The numbers expanded until they dominated the room. Between the second and third quarters of this fiscal year, precisely $250,000 evaporated from these protected escrow accounts. The funds were siphoned out through a series of complex, staggered wire transfers designed to look like routine administrative fee disbursements. Monique frowned, leaning forward to squint at the numbers. "Administrative fees. $250,000. Our compliance department oversees those transfers personally. That kind of money does not just disappear without triggering a massive internal audit. It does not trigger an audit when the person authorizing the transfers possesses executive override credentials," I replied, my voice slicing through the heavy air. "And it certainly does not trigger an alarm when that same person is aggressively positioning himself to become the next vice president, using his intimate relationship with the CEO's daughter to bypass standard oversight protocols." Mr. Harrington finally sat up straight, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. He looked sharply at Brandon. "Brandon, what exactly are we looking at here?" Brandon was hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his expensive suit. "It is fabricated. She hacked the system. She is framing me, sir. I swear to you, I have never touched client funds." I did not raise my voice. I simply tapped the tablet again. "Let us trace the money." The screen shifted. The red numbers from the escrow accounts were placed side by side with a newly uncovered set of banking records. I had utilized Gallagher's private investigators to dig deep into Brandon's offshore movements. The stolen $250,000 did not stay within the firm's ecosystem. It was systematically routed through a corporate shell entity registered in Delaware before being wired directly into an offshore private banking account located in the Cayman Islands. I highlighted the routing numbers on the offshore account. Then I displayed a secondary document confirming the registered owner of that specific Cayman account. The name Brandon Thomas Evans flashed across the screen in bold, undeniable text. "You see, Brandon," I said, finally looking directly at him, "you always believed you were the smartest person in any room. You thought routing stolen corporate funds through a shell company made you invisible. You forgot that digital money always leaves a footprint. And you possess incredibly expensive, highly trackable tastes. I swiped to the final piece of evidence. The screen filled with a series of high-end retail receipts, all directly linked to the offshore Cayman account. There were charges for five-star luxury resorts in Aspen, exorbitant bills from Michelin-starred restaurants, and receipts for custom-tailored Italian suits. But the most egregious expenditure I announced, projecting a specific, heavily detailed invoice from a world-renowned Parisian jeweler, was authorized exactly 3 weeks ago. A direct wire transfer of $45,000 for a custom platinum set diamond pendant. I slowly turned my gaze from the screen to Monique. She was sitting rigidly in her chair, her face drained of all color. Her hand had instinctively risen to her chest, her fingers trembling violently as they clutched the heavy glittering platinum and diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. "Yes, Monique," I said softly, the silence in the boardroom growing absolute and terrifying. "The exact Cartier necklace you are currently wearing around your neck. The one Brandon undoubtedly presented to you as a token of his immense success and devotion." Monique gasped, physically recoiling from the jewelry as if it had suddenly caught fire. She looked at Brandon with pure, unadulterated revulsion. "You bought this with stolen client money," she whispered, her voice cracking with horror. "You told me it was a family heirloom. You told me it was from your grandmother." "Monique, baby, please, you have to listen to me," Brandon pleaded, reaching his hand out toward her across the heavy mahogany table. "She is manipulating the data. She is trying to turn you against me." Monique slapped his hand away violently. "Do not touch me!" Mr. Harrington stood up slowly. His towering frame cast a long, dark shadow across the boardroom table. The initial shock and resignation that had clouded his features when I first entered the room had completely vanished. His face had turned a deep, terrifying shade of purple. The veins in his neck were pulsing visibly against his pristine white collar. The full catastrophic weight of the situation had finally slammed into him. The man he had trusted, the man he had mentored, the man he had welcomed into his home and actively prepared to elevate to vice president was a common thief. Brandon Evans had not just committed perjury in family court. He had not just brutally betrayed and discarded his pregnant wife. He had systematically embezzled $250,000 from Harrington Investments' highly protected client escrow accounts. And he had used that stolen corporate money to buy lavish, expensive gifts to secure Monique's affection, essentially forcing Mr. Harrington's own company to fund Brandon's predatory romantic deception. Harrington's hands balled into tight fists. He stared down at Brandon with a look of murderous, uncontainable rage, fully realizing that the man sitting in his boardroom had used his own daughter as a pawn in a massive criminal extortion scheme. Mr. Harrington stood completely rigid, the air in the boardroom pulling taut before snapping under the sheer, unadulterated force of his fury. His massive hands slammed flat against the polished mahogany table, the impact vibrating heavily through the solid wood. A guttural sound of pure disgust tore from his throat. Monique reacted a split second later. She clawed frantically at the back of her neck, tearing at the delicate platinum clasp. The chain snapped, scratching her skin, but she did not care. She hurled the diamond pendant directly at Brandon. The heavy cluster of precious stones struck him squarely in the chest before clattering loudly onto the floor, skidding to a halt near his expensive Italian leather shoes. "You stealing parasitic fraud!" Harrington bellowed, his voice vibrating with enough rage to shatter the floor-to-ceiling windows. He reached for the heavy silver phone resting on the center console of the table, slamming his thumb onto the emergency intercom button. "Send building security to the executive boardroom immediately. Lock down the elevators. No one leaves this floor." Brandon's carefully constructed facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The arrogant, untouchable portfolio manager ceased to exist. His knees gave out. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor, scrambling wildly over the scattered papers and the discarded Cartier necklace. He grabbed the edge of Harrington's tailored suit jacket, his face contorted in a grotesque mask of absolute terror. "Sir, please," Brandon shrieked, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. It was a temporary loan I was going to replace the capital after the promotion. You know I am good for it. I love your daughter. I was doing it to give her the lifestyle she deserves. Please do not do this. You are like a father to me." Harrington violently kicked his leg free, sending Brandon sprawling backward onto the rug. "Do not ever speak to my daughter again," the CEO snarled, his chest heaving. "You are terminated effective immediately. You will surrender your company phone, your security badge, and your keys. You are not just fired, Brandon. I am personally calling the Financial Crimes Division of the Police Department. I will see you buried in a federal penitentiary for corporate embezzlement." Brandon broke down into ugly, racking sobs. He curled in on himself, burying his face in his hands, begging incoherently. He pleaded for mercy, offering to work for free, offering to sign over his personal assets completely stripped of his massive ego. He looked pathetic, a cornered rat desperately bargaining for a sliver of daylight that had already been permanently extinguished. I watched him sob from the head of the table, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold surgical satisfaction. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice. I simply unclasped my leather portfolio and slid a single crisp document across the vast expanse of the table toward Mr. Harrington. "This is a binding corporate resolution," I stated, my tone slicing through the pathetic sounds of Brandon's weeping. "As the new majority stakeholder, I possess the unilateral authority to immediately dissolve Harrington Investments and liquidate the remaining assets. Such an action would permanently destroy your family's legacy and leave you financially ruined." Harrington tore his murderous gaze away from Brandon and looked at me, his breathing heavy, waiting for the inevitable blow. However, I continued, tapping my manicured fingernail against the thick parchment. "I have no desire to destroy a functional corporate apparatus. I am prepared to sign this agreement, which permanently restructures the debt, stabilizes the equity shares, and leaves you in your position as chief executive officer. I will provide the necessary capital to completely bail out your toxic commercial real estate portfolio." Monique stared at me, her tear-streaked face reflecting total disbelief. She realized I was actively handing them a financial lifeline. "There is exactly one condition," I said, leaning forward, letting my gaze lock with Harrington's. "You will prosecute Brandon Evans to the absolute fullest extent of state and federal law. You will not accept a plea deal. You will not allow him to quietly resign. You will hand over all internal ledgers, security footage, and email servers to the authorities today. If he receives anything less than the maximum prison sentence for his embezzlement, I will dissolve this firm." Harrington did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He pulled a pen from his breast pocket and signed his name aggressively across the bottom line. "It will be my absolute pleasure, Mrs. Evans." "It is Ms. Vance," I corrected smoothly, collecting the signed document and handing it to Gallagher. The heavy oak doors burst open. 4 large, imposing security guards rushed into the boardroom, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers, who had already been in the building, investigating a separate corporate compliance issue. Harrington pointed a trembling finger directly at the crumpled mass on the floor. "Arrest that man for grand larceny and corporate embezzlement," Harrington ordered. The officers hauled Brandon to his feet roughly. He was completely unresponsive to their commands, his legs resembling jelly as they wrenched his arms behind his back. The cold, metallic ratcheting sound of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly into place echoed sharply throughout the expansive room. Brandon lifted his head one final time as the officers began forcefully dragging him toward the open doorway. His tear-soaked, utterly destroyed eyes met mine in a silent, desperate plea for a single ounce of mercy he never possessed himself. He had systematically attempted to leave me pregnant, penniless, and entirely discarded. He had tried to weaponize the legal system to extort my family's legacy. Now he possessed absolutely nothing. The reality of his total destruction finally settled upon his shoulders. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my tailored suit jacket, projecting total, absolute, unshakable control. I looked down at the ruined, pathetic man being hauled away toward a waiting patrol car. "Try getting an Uber now, Brandon," I said, watching the heavy doors close on his miserable life. The heavy oak doors clicked shut. This sealed Brandon's fate and silenced his pathetic sobs forever. I turned back to Mr. Harrington. He looked as though he had aged a decade in the span of 10 minutes, yet a fierce determination burned deep in his eyes. We spent the remainder of the afternoon executing the structural bailout. We secured the firm's assets and ensured Brandon's criminal prosecution was bulletproof. By sunrise the following morning, the financial district was already buzzing. The local daily papers and digital business journals ran the explosive headline, "Harrington Investments Executive Arrested for Grand Larceny Today." The article detailed Brandon making his humiliating walk out of the glass monolith. It included full-color photographs of him wearing handcuffs. Across town, in the exclusive suburb of Oak Cliff, Cynthia Evans dropped her bone china teacup. She watched it shatter against her pristine hardwood floor. The morning news broadcast blared from her massive television. It displayed her golden boy looking terrified in a mugshot. Cynthia had spent her entire adult life curating a flawless image of suburban superiority. She operated the local country club social committee with an iron fist. She constantly bragged about Brandon's elite career and his impending marriage to a wealthy daughter. She had routinely mocked my career ambitions. She declared me an unworthy anchor dragging down her son's limitless potential. Now her ultimate pride and joy was sitting in a federal holding cell. His bail was set at $2 million. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her chest. Cynthia immediately shifted into aggressive damage control. She grabbed her designer handbag and slid into her luxury vehicle. She sped directly to the primary branch of the Oak Cliff Fidelity Bank. She did not bother to make an appointment. She stormed past the receptionist and marched straight into the branch manager's private corner office. She demanded immediate service. Mr. Caldwell, a mild-mannered man who had managed the Evans family accounts for years, looked up in surprise. Cynthia slammed her leather purse onto his desk. "I need a second mortgage on the Oak Cliff property immediately," Cynthia demanded. Her voice was shrill with frantic entitlement. "Brandon has been caught in a ridiculous, fabricated misunderstanding. I need liquid capital for his bail and the best defense attorney in the state. Process the paperwork against the house. It is fully paid off, and it is currently appraised at over $1.5 million today." Mr. Caldwell did not reach for any forms. He did not offer his usual polite smile. Instead, he stared at Cynthia with a mixture of profound pity and deep discomfort. He adjusted his glasses. He slowly pulled up her account details on his computer monitor. "Mrs. Evans, I am afraid that is completely impossible," Caldwell stated quietly. His voice was incredibly tight. Cynthia bristled immediately. Her posture radiated arrogant indignation. "Do not tell me what is impossible, Robert. I am a premier client. My house is the largest asset on the block. Draw up the equity line right now today, or I will move my accounts to a bank that respects my family." Caldwell sighed heavily. He turned his monitor so Cynthia could see the glowing screen. "You cannot take out a second mortgage, Mrs. Evans. This is because your property is already heavily leveraged. In fact, it is entirely underwater." Cynthia froze. The blood completely drained from her perfectly contoured face. "What are you talking about? I paid that house off 5 years ago after my husband passed away. 8 months ago, a massive equity line of credit was opened against the property," Caldwell explained. He pointed directly at a cascade of red numbers. The maximum allowable amount was extracted. "According to these authenticated documents, you authorized the transfer of over $1 million into a high-risk offshore trading account managed by your son." "I authorized no such thing!" Cynthia shrieked. She gripped the edge of the heavy desk to keep from collapsing entirely. "I never signed those papers. I never took out a single loan." Caldwell pulled a physical file from his drawer. He slid a notarized authorization form across the polished wood desk. Cynthia stared at the bottom signature line right there. Executed with absolute perfect precision was her signature. Brandon had not just stolen from his corporate clients. When his aggressive toxic market trades had begun failing spectacularly months ago, he desperately needed capital to cover his margins. To save his own skin, Brandon silently forged his own mother's signature. He leveraged the family estate to the absolute hilt. He subsequently incinerated every single penny in the market. Furthermore, Mrs. Evans Caldwell continued. His voice dropped to a grim whisper. Those equity payments have been in default for 90 days. The bank initiated formal foreclosure proceedings last week. We assumed you already knew about this. You have less than 48 hours to vacate the premises. Cynthia's pristine, carefully constructed reality imploded. The suburban mansion was her ultimate symbol of status. It was the weapon she used to look down on everyone else. Now it was gone. Her golden boy secretly stole her home to fund his greed. He left her utterly destitute. 2 days later, the scene on Maple Drive was a spectacular display of absolute ruin. The bank's foreclosure agents arrived with a police escort to enforce the immediate eviction. Cynthia's credit cards failed entirely today. They were completely maxed out from trying to maintain wealth. She could not afford movers. She could not afford a storage unit. Her precious designer luggage had been seized by debt collectors. Cynthia Evans, the undisputed queen of the country club, was reduced to stuffing her expensive clothing and remaining personal items into black trash bags on her front lawn. Her perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess. Keisha drove by the house as Cynthia was evicted. She was driving toward her new fully funded clinic. Keisha rolled down her window to wave cheerfully before driving away down the lovely street today, forever. That cheerful wave was not just a farewell to a miserable mother-in-law, it was the opening salvo of Keisha's own liberation. She drove straight to the downtown offices of the most ruthless family law attorney in the state. Marcus had spent their marriage mirroring his mother's toxic behavior constantly, belittling Keisha's medical career and demanding she shrink to fit their suburban mold. He was convinced of his own superiority, completely unaware that Keisha had been methodically documenting every hidden bank account and secret asset he possessed. When Marcus was served with divorce papers, his arrogant world violently collapsed. Keisha initiated a scorched earth legal campaign. She laid bare his financial infidelities with surgical precision, leveraging the destruction of his reputation to secure a brutal, uncompromising settlement. She legally seized exactly half of everything he owned, including his beloved investment portfolios and the primary residence. Marcus, left reeling and financially diminished, was entirely powerless to stop her. Free from the suffocating grasp of the Evans family, Keisha stepped into the bright daylight of her potential. I was waiting for her when she walked out of the courthouse, a free woman. I did not offer platitudes. I offered her an empire. While my forensic accounting team dismantled Harrington Investments, I had finalized the primary objective of my grandfather's immense wealth. I established the Thomas Gallagher Philanthropic Trust. I carved out a massive, unassailable wing of the $86 million estate dedicated entirely to the advancement of pediatric medicine. We sat in my penthouse office overlooking the sprawling city skyline. I handed Keisha a thick, embossed leather binder. She opened it, her eyes tracking the complex legal jargon and structural plans, her breath hitching as the reality of the document set in. It was a fully funded charter for a state-of-the-art pediatric hospital ward specializing in advanced neonatal care and critical pediatric surgery. I leaned back in my chair, resting my hands on the slight swell of my stomach. I am not a doctor, Keisha. I stated, my voice echoing with absolute clarity. I am a corporate architect. I build systems and I dismantle liabilities. But this trust requires a medical visionary. It requires someone who understands the stakes of human life, someone who refuses to compromise on care. I am officially appointing you as the Chief Medical Director of the Gallagher Pediatric Center. You have total operational control, an unlimited hiring budget, and the absolute backing of my entire financial apparatus. Keisha stared at the multi-million-dollar operating budget, tears of pure, unadulterated triumph welling in her eyes. The woman who had been systematically marginalized by Cynthia Evans, who had been told her grueling medical residency was an inconvenience to suburban dinner parties, was now the supreme medical authority of the most heavily funded pediatric initiative in the region. She accepted the position without a single moment of hesitation, her signature on the contract cementing our unbreakable alliance. With the corporate executions finalized and the philanthropic foundation secured, I needed to fulfill one last vital obligation. The autumn air was crisp and biting as Arthur Gallagher drove me through the heavy wrought iron gates of the city's oldest, most prestigious cemetery. The grounds were immaculate, a sea of silent marble monuments standing guard under the gray, overcast sky. I walked alone up the gentle rolling hill toward the Gallagher family plot. The massive obsidian headstone marking my grandfather's final resting place gleamed under the filtered sunlight. I stood before the polished stone, my posture perfectly straight, the sharp wind whipping the edge of my tailored cashmere coat. I did not cry. There were no tears left to shed, no lingering sorrow to anchor me to the past. The broken, terrified woman who had been dragged out of her own home in the middle of the night no longer existed. In her place stood a titan forged in the fires of their betrayal and tempered by the immense power my grandfather had entrusted to me. I reached into my bag and withdrew 2 items. I laid a single pristine white rose at the base of the dark monument. Then I placed a rolled, thick blue parchment directly beside it. It was the finalized, approved architectural blueprint for the Gallagher Pediatric Center. "You were right, Thomas," I said softly, the wind carrying my words across the silent stones. "You told me to use your legacy as a sword and a shield. I used it to carve out the rot and break the people who thought they could destroy your bloodline. But your legacy is not just about retribution anymore. It is about resurrection. Because of the power you gave me, thousands of children will receive the care they need to survive. Your wealth is a lifeline." I stood there in the peaceful, quiet solitude for a few minutes longer, feeling a profound, unshakable peace finally settle deep within my tired bones. The oppressive ghosts of my traumatic past had been permanently exorcised from my life, completely replaced by the tangible, undeniable reality of the bright future I had violently claimed for us. 2 months passed with the rapid, unstoppable momentum of a newly established empire. Winter began to thaw, making way for the early, vibrant signs of spring. I stood by the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows of my executive penthouse, the sprawling city moving to the rhythm of the industries I now controlled. I was exactly 8 months pregnant. The physical evidence of my impending motherhood was undeniable, a beautiful, radiant testament to the life I had protected at all costs. I placed my hand gently over my stomach, feeling the strong, rhythmic kicks of my child. I was absolutely glowing, my skin radiating health and unyielding power. I had not merely survived the darkest, most treacherous period of my life, I had conquered it. I stood at the absolute pinnacle of a newly forged reality, wealthy beyond measure, surrounded by fierce, loyal allies and completely free. The past was a conquered territory, and the future belonged entirely to us. The glass doors of the Vanguard Tower parted flawlessly as I stepped into the afternoon air of the financial district. The towering skyscraper, a gleaming monument of steel and reflective glass, was now the operational headquarters for Evans Gallagher Authentication Technologies. Walking across the polished granite plaza, I felt the unmistakable weight of genuine respect radiating from the people around me. Executives in bespoke suits offered polite, deferential nods. Senior partners from rival firms paused their conversations to watch me pass. I was no longer the discarded, underestimated pregnant wife scrambling for survival. I was the architect of an industry revolution. Over the past several months, I had successfully merged my deep specialized expertise in forensic antique appraisal with the highly advanced predictive artificial intelligence framework my grandfather Thomas had left behind. The resulting software system was entirely unprecedented. It systematically compared historical databases, carbon dating registries, and microscopic material analyses in fractions of a second, rendering traditional forgery completely obsolete. Major auction houses, international museums, and private wealth management firms had scrambled to license the proprietary technology. We had secured over $200 million in global software contracts before the system even exited its beta testing phase. I walked with a measured, deliberate pace, my posture radiating the quiet, unassailable confidence of a woman who had systematically dismantled her enemies and built a fortress on their ashes. My phone vibrated silently inside the pocket of my tailored maternity blazer. It was a brief email from my lead legal counsel confirming the final liquidation of Harrington Investments' remaining toxic assets. The closure was absolute. The corporate purge was finally and officially complete. A faint, satisfied smile touched my lips as I approached the curb. I allowed my mind to drift just for a fraction of a second to the parallel reality currently being experienced by the man who had tried to destroy me. 50 miles north of the city center, deep within the bleak concrete walls of the state penitentiary, Brandon Evans was experiencing the brutal reality of his new existence. Stripped of his tailored Italian suits and platinum cufflinks, he now wore a standard-issue fluorescent orange jumpsuit. The fabric was stiff, cheap, and deeply humiliating. He was currently on his hands and knees clutching a coarse, bristled brush, methodically scrubbing the grimy linoleum floor of the cafeteria. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead cast sickly shadows across his gaunt, pale face. The former portfolio manager, a man who once believed he was destined to rule the financial sector, was now relegated to menial sanitation duties. He had zero corporate status, zero wealth, and absolutely zero allies. The federal judge had shown absolutely no mercy during the sentencing phase, specifically citing his predatory manipulation of corporate escrow accounts and his callous disregard for fiduciary duty. He was locked away in a cage of his own making, surrounded by hardened criminals who cared nothing about his previous elevator pitches or his golf handicap. Every single time he scrubbed a stubborn stain from the floor, he was forced to remember the massive corporate empire he had arrogantly thrown away for a cheap affair and a stolen necklace. Meanwhile, Cynthia Evans was living her own personalized nightmare. Her beloved suburban mansion, the ultimate symbol of her perceived superiority, had been swiftly auctioned off by the bank. She was violently evicted, forced to cram whatever meager belongings she could carry into cheap black trash bags. She now resided in a cramped, moldy studio apartment located in a severely neglected industrial part of town. The wallpaper was peeling in thick yellowed strips, and the single window looked out over a rusted metal fence. Cynthia sat on a lumpy, stained mattress, shivering in the damp chill of the poorly insulated room. She had absolutely no one left to call. Her country club friends had completely blacklisted her the exact moment the embezzlement scandal hit the local news. Keisha had formally blocked her number after securing her massive divorce settlement. Her golden boy was rotting in a prison cell, entirely incapable of bailing her out of the spectacular mess he had created. Cynthia spent her days staring blankly at the stained ceiling, utterly consumed by the bitter, inescapable realization that her relentless cruelty and overwhelming greed had cost her everything. The very sharp honk of a passing taxi pulled my attention firmly back to the present moment, away from the shattered lives of the people who had tried to bury me. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, the vibrant energy of the thriving city pulsing all around me. Arthur Gallagher stepped out from the driver's side of a sleek, meticulously polished luxury sedan parked at the curb. He moved with his usual quiet dignity, opening the heavy rear passenger door for me. He offered a respectful, genuine bow of his head. "Excellent work today, Miss Vance," Arthur said, his voice carrying a note of profound pride. "Thank you, Arthur," I replied warmly. "The future is looking exceptionally bright." I stepped gracefully into the luxurious, quiet interior of the vehicle. The soft, premium leather seats embraced me. I settled back, letting out a long, peaceful breath. I rested both my hands protectively over my large, round baby bump. The child growing inside me kicked strongly, a vibrant surge of life that filled my entire heart with an overwhelming, protective warmth. I smiled, a genuine, triumphant expression of pure joy. I had lost a deeply toxic, abusive family, but in the process, I had forged something infinitely better. I had built an unbreakable corporate empire from the ground up. I had secured a lasting protective legacy for my grandfather. And most importantly, I had guaranteed a beautiful, completely secure, and endlessly bright future for my unborn child. We were safe. We were victorious. We were unstoppable. Do you think Brandon deserved his prison sentence or was losing the $86 million and his corporate status, the ultimate punishment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.